When a pregnant widow and her young son arrive at Benjamin Cray's forge claiming they were told he needed a family, the grief-stricken blacksmith must choose between the safety of his solitude and the dangerous hope of loving again. But when her late husband's family arrives with guns and gold, demanding she return to claim an inheritance that could secure their future, will Benjamin's love be enough to outweigh the promise of everything money can buy? The hammer crashed down like thunder, sending sparks flying through the smoky air of Benjamin Cray's blacksmith shop. Each strike rang out across the empty Kansas prairie, echoing off the wooden buildings of Millfield like a lonely heartbeat. It was August 1867, and the sun burned hot overhead, turning the forge into a furnace that could melt iron and dreams alike. Benjamin wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of black soot across his weathered skin. His muscles ached from hours of pounding red-hot metal, but the pain felt good. It kept his mind busy. It kept him from thinking about things he couldn't change. The horseshoe he was making glowed orange-red in the dim light of his workshop. He gripped it with heavy iron tongs, turning it this way and that, checking every curve and angle. Mrs. Patterson's old mare needed new shoes, and Benjamin took pride in his work. Even when everything else in his life had fallen apart, he could still make something useful with his hands. A meadowlark sang somewhere in the distance, its sweet song floating on the hot summer breeze. Benjamin paused his hammering to listen. The bird's call reminded him of his wife Martha's laugh, clear and musical and full of joy. But Martha had been dead for 3 years now, taken by the same fever that claimed their baby daughter. The meadowlark's song only made the silence feel heavier. Benjamin's small house sat just behind the forge, connected by a wooden walkway he'd built himself. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room that felt too big for one person. The vegetable garden out back had grown wild with weeds. Martha used to tend it every morning, humming while she worked. Now Benjamin couldn't bear to look at it. He heated the horseshoe again, watching the metal glow like a tiny sun in his calloused hands. The fire in the forge burned steady and hot, fed by chunks of coal he ordered from the railroad depot in Independence. Coal was expensive, but it burned hotter than wood. Good ironwork needed real heat. A wagon rolled past on the dusty main road, heading toward town. Benjamin recognized the driver, John Murphy, probably taking corn to the grain elevator. John raised his hand in a friendly wave, but Benjamin only nodded back. He wasn't much for talking these days. Words seemed pointless when you had nothing important to say. The church bell in town chimed 3 times. 3 o'clock meant the school children would be getting out soon. Benjamin could picture them running through the streets, their laughter carried on the wind. Joshua Miller would be among them, the 7-year-old boy who sometimes stopped by the forge to watch Benjamin work. The kid asked a million questions about everything: why metal got soft when it was hot, how horses' hooves didn't hurt when you nailed shoes to them, where the sparks came from when hammer hit iron. Benjamin liked the boy's curiosity, even if it sometimes reminded him of the child he'd lost. The daughter who would never ask questions, never run through the streets, never grow up to have children of her own. He dunked the finished horseshoe into a bucket of water. Steam rose up in a white cloud, hissing like an angry snake. The metal cooled and hardened, turning from glowing orange to dull gray. Another piece of work completed. Another way to fill the empty hours. The bottle of whiskey sat hidden behind a sack of grain, where Martha would never have thought to look. Benjamin knew it was there, calling to him like a siren song. Just one drink to ease the ache in his chest. Just one drink to make the silence bearable. But it was never just one drink, and Benjamin was trying to be better than that. Trying to honor Martha's memory by staying sober, staying useful, staying alive. A hawk circled overhead, riding the hot air currents with wings spread wide. Benjamin watched it soar, envying its freedom. The bird could go anywhere, see anything, leave this dusty town behind without looking back. Sometimes Benjamin dreamed of doing the same, packing his tools and heading west, starting over somewhere nobody knew his story. But this was home, and home was all he had left of the life he'd shared with Martha. The afternoon heat shimmered off the prairie, making the horizon dance and waver like water. Endless grass stretched in every direction. broken only by scattered farmhouses and the thin line of the railroad track. This was big country, wide open country, that made a man feel small and lonely if he let it. Benjamin started work on another horseshoe, heating the iron bar until it glowed. The routine was comforting. Heat, hammer, shape, cool. Heat, hammer, shape, cool. His hands knew the motions by heart, leaving his mind free to wander. Sometimes he imagined Martha standing in the doorway, watching him work with those green eyes that always seemed to be smiling. Sometimes he pretended their daughter was toddling around the workshop, getting into everything the way children do. But imagination was a dangerous thing. It made the real world seem even emptier when you came back to it. A dust devil spun across the prairie, picking up loose grass and dirt in its whirling dance. Benjamin watched it twist and turn, here one moment and gone the next. Everything in this world was temporary, he'd learned. People you loved could disappear as quick as smoke. The only things that lasted were the iron shoes he made, the nails he forged, the tools that would outlive the hands that shaped them. The sun started its slow journey toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Soon it would be evening, then night, then another long stretch of darkness to get through. Benjamin would eat a simple supper, maybe read a few pages from the Bible Martha had loved, then lie awake, listening to the wind whistle through the eaves. Another day survived, another small victory in the battle against despair. But as he worked, hammering rhythm steady as a heartbeat, Benjamin couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The feeling you get before a storm hits, when the air turns electric and the birds stop singing. Change was coming to Millfield, Kansas, whether he wanted it or not. And somewhere in the distance, getting closer with each passing hour, was a sound he hadn't heard in far too long, the sound of hope approaching on weary feet. The knock came soft but insistent, barely audible over the dying hiss of cooling metal. Benjamin froze with the hammer halfway to the anvil, his heart jumping like a startled rabbit. Nobody visited his forge this late in the day. Nobody visited his forge at all anymore, except for customers picking up their orders or young Joshua with his endless stream of questions. "Mister? You in there?" A woman's voice, tired and uncertain, drifted through the smoky air. Benjamin set down his hammer carefully, wiping his sooty hands on the leather apron tied around his waist. Through the open doorway of his workshop, he could see a figure silhouetted against the golden afternoon light, small and slight, swaying slightly as if she'd been walking for a very long time. "I'm here," he called out, stepping into the light. The woman standing before him looked like she'd traveled hard miles to get here. Her brown hair escaped from beneath a faded blue bonnet, and her simple dress, though clean, showed dust in every fold. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that would have been pretty if exhaustion hadn't drawn dark circles under her green eyes. But it was her posture that caught Benjamin's attention. Straight-backed, despite obvious weariness, chin raised with a pride that spoke of battles already fought and won. "Are you Benjamin Cray?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight tremor that might have been nerves or might have been something else entirely. "I am." Benjamin wiped his hands again, suddenly aware of how he must look, covered in soot, smelling of coal smoke and honest sweat. "What can I do for you, miss?" "Mrs. she corrected gently, then took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Mrs. Emma Hartwell. I was told you might need a family." The words hit Benjamin like a physical blow. He stared at her, trying to make sense of what she'd said. "Who told you that?" "Reverend Morrison, over in Independence. He said you lost your wife and child, and that maybe." She paused, one hand moving unconsciously to her rounded belly, which Benjamin now noticed pressed against the fabric of her dress. "Maybe we could help each other." "We." That's when Benjamin saw the boy. He'd been hiding behind his mother's brown skirts, but now he peered around her with eyes the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and full of questions no 7-year-old should have to ask. The child was thin as a fence post, all sharp elbows and knobby knees, with hair the same brown color as his mother's. In his small hands, he clutched a wooden horse carved with more love than skill, its paint worn smooth by countless hours of play. "This is my son, Joshua," Emma said, stepping aside so the boy was fully visible. "Joshua, say hello to Mr. Cray." The boy looked up at Benjamin with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Are you really a blacksmith? Can you make swords and armor like the knights in Ma's stories?" Despite the shock of their sudden appearance, Benjamin felt his mouth twitch toward what might have been a smile. "I make horseshoes mostly. Some nails and tools. Nothing as exciting as swords, I'm afraid." "Joshua," Emma said gently, "let Mr. Cray think about what we discussed." But Benjamin was already thinking too much. About the empty house behind him that echoed with memories of laughter that would never return. About the bottle of whiskey he kept hidden behind the grain sacks, and how it called to him when the silence became too loud. About the way his hands sometimes shook in the morning when he couldn't find a reason to light the forge. He looked at Emma's belly, rounded with new life, and felt his chest tighten with equal parts longing and terror. Another child's cry to fill the silence. Another chance to fail someone who needed him. "You're expecting," he said, the words coming out more bluntly than he'd intended. Color rose in Emma's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, come winter. My husband William died in a mining accident near Deadwood 6 months ago. I've been working at Mrs. Crawford's boarding house in Independence, but," she gestured to her growing belly, "she let me go last week. Said it wouldn't be proper to have an unwed mother working there much longer." Benjamin studied her face, seeing the careful way she held herself, the slight tremor in her hands that she tried to hide. This was a woman at the end of her rope, but still fighting, still hoping. "Why me?" he asked. "Why not someone in Independence? Someone you already know?" Emma's smile was sad but genuine. "Because Reverend Morrison said you were a good man who'd lost everything, just like us. He said maybe 3 broken people might be able to help each other heal." Joshua stepped forward then, still clutching his wooden horse. "Mister, my horse is hurt. See?" He held up the toy, showing where one of the carved legs was shorter than the others, worn down by countless hours of galloping across imaginary landscapes. "Ma says maybe you could fix him, since you're good with your hands." Benjamin knelt down to the boy's level, studying the wooden horse with the same serious attention he gave to real horseshoes. The carving was simple but lovingly made, probably by the boy's father before he died. One leg was indeed shorter, throwing off the horse's balance and making it wobble when Joshua tried to make it stand. "What's his name?" Benjamin asked. "Thunder," Joshua replied solemnly. "He's the fastest horse in the whole territory, but he can't run right with his bad leg." Benjamin looked up at Emma, who watched their interaction with something like hope flickering in her tired eyes. He thought about the forge behind him, still warm from the day's work. About the scrap metal he always kept for small repairs and special projects. About the way Joshua's face lit up when he talked about his horse. "I might be able to help Thunder," Benjamin said finally, "but it would mean staying for supper while I work on him. That all right with you?" Joshua looked to his mother for permission, bouncing slightly on his toes with excitement. Emma nodded, and the boy's grin could have powered the forge all by itself. "Really? You'll really fix him?" "I'll try my best," Benjamin said, standing up and dusting off his knees. "But first, let's get you folks something to eat. You look like you've been traveling hard." Emma's shoulders sagged slightly with relief, and Benjamin realized she'd been holding herself rigid with tension until now. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Cray. We don't want to be any trouble." "Benjamin," he corrected, "and it's no trouble at all." As he led them toward his house, Benjamin caught sight of his reflection in the workshop window, a man covered in soot, leading a pregnant woman and her child toward a home that had been empty too long. For the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. Behind them, the forge glowed with dying coals, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its sweet song into the gathering dusk. Change had come to Millfield, Kansas, in the form of a desperate woman and a boy with a broken toy horse. And for reasons Benjamin couldn't yet name, that change felt like the answer to a prayer he'd never dared to speak aloud. "Ma, look, he's making magic." Joshua's excited shout rang through the workshop as sparks flew from Benjamin's hammer like tiny falling stars. The boy pressed his nose against the wooden workbench, watching with wide eyes as the blacksmith heated a small piece of scrap iron until it glowed red as sunset. Emma stood in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee, marveling at how different her son looked when wonder replaced worry on his 7-year-old face. Benjamin wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled at Joshua's amazement. "Not magic, son. Just very hot metal and a steady hand." He pulled the glowing iron from the forge with his tongs, checking its color in the fading daylight. "The trick is knowing exactly when it's ready to shape." 3 days had passed since Emma and Joshua arrived at his door, and Benjamin was still getting used to the sounds of life filling his empty spaces. Emma's humming drifted from the kitchen, where she prepared their evening meal. Joshua's constant chatter replaced the lonely silence that had haunted the forge for so long. Even the house felt different, warmer somehow, as if it remembered what it was like to be a home instead of just a place to sleep. The tiny horseshoe Benjamin was crafting would be no bigger than a silver dollar when finished. He'd spent hours getting the proportions just right, heating and reheating the metal, shaping each curve with gentle taps from his smallest hammer. "This wasn't paying work, Mrs. Cording, this is Cording." Patterson had already collected her mare's new shoes yesterday. This was something else entirely. This was hope taking physical form under his careful hands. "Will it really make Thunder run faster?" Joshua asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Well," Benjamin said thoughtfully, "a good horseshoe helps a horse run without stumbling. So Thunder should be able to gallop wherever your imagination takes him." Emma set down her coffee cup and moved closer to watch Benjamin work. The blacksmith's hands were gentle despite their size, coaxing the hot metal into perfect miniature curves. She'd never seen anyone take such care with something so small, something that mattered to no one except a lonely little boy and his broken toy. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "It's just a wooden horse." Benjamin paused in his hammering and looked at her with eyes that held depths of understanding. "My Martha used to say there's no such thing as just when it comes to a child's treasures. Every toy carries a piece of their heart." The mention of his dead wife made Emma's chest tighten with sympathy. She'd been sleeping in Martha's old sewing room for 3 nights now, surrounded by half-finished quilts and dried flowers that still held the ghost of another woman's perfume. Benjamin had offered her the main bedroom, but Emma couldn't bring herself to sleep in a dead woman's bed. Some boundaries felt too sacred to cross, even in desperate times. Joshua climbed onto a wooden stool to get a better view of the tiny horseshoe taking shape. "Tell me about Thunder's adventures," he said to Benjamin, the way he'd been doing each evening since they arrived. Benjamin smiled and continued his careful work. "Well, yesterday Thunder outran a tornado across the Nebraska plains. The day before, he jumped over a canyon so wide that eagles got tired flying across it." "What about today?" Joshua asked eagerly. "Today," Benjamin said, dunking the finished horseshoe into his water bucket with a satisfying hiss of steam. "Thunder gets his new shoe. And tomorrow, he'll be ready for his biggest adventure yet." Emma watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and growing concern. Joshua was becoming attached to Benjamin faster than she'd expected. Every morning, her son ran to the workshop before breakfast, eager to help with whatever project the blacksmith was tackling. Every evening, he begged for stories about brave horses and distant lands. The boy was hungry for a father's attention, and Benjamin seemed happy to give it. But what would happen when their temporary arrangement ended? When the baby came and Benjamin realized he'd taken on more than he bargained for? Emma had learned not to count on kindness lasting forever. People meant well at first, but babies were expensive and demanding. Pregnant women got sick and couldn't work as hard. Good intentions had a way of wearing thin when reality set in. Benjamin lifted the tiny horseshoe with his tongs, examining it in the lamplight. The metal had cooled to a dull gray color, perfectly shaped and proportioned. He set it carefully on the workbench next to Joshua's wooden horse. "There," he said with satisfaction. "One shoe for Thunder, custom-made and guaranteed to last." Joshua reached for the horseshoe, then pulled his hand back. "Is it still hot?" "Cool as creek water now. Go ahead and touch it." The boy picked up the miniature shoe with reverent care, turning it over in his small hands. It was heavier than he'd expected, solid and real, in a way that made Thunder's upcoming repair feel important and official. "How do we put it on?" Joshua asked. Benjamin reached for a small metal file and a tiny hammer from his tool collection. Very carefully, We'll need to file a small notch in Thunder's leg, right where the shoe will sit. Then we'll attach it with a drop of pine sap. That'll hold better than nails on wood." As Benjamin worked, Emma found herself studying his face in the flickering lamplight. There was a gentleness in his expression that she hadn't seen in many men, a patience that suggested he genuinely enjoyed Joshua's company rather than merely tolerating it. Her son had been without a father for 6 months now, and the hunger for male attention showed in every question he asked, every story he absorbed, every moment he spent trailing behind Benjamin like a devoted shadow. The thought both warmed and terrified her. "There," Benjamin announced, holding up the wooden horse with its new metal shoe attached to the shortened leg. "Thunder is officially healed and ready for action." Joshua took his horse with hands that shook slightly from excitement. He set Thunder on the workbench and gave him an experimental push. The toy rolled smoothly now, no longer wobbling or tipping to one side. "He's perfect," Joshua exclaimed. "Thunder, we can go anywhere now." Benjamin cleaned his tools while Joshua galloped his horse across the workbench, through imaginary valleys and over invisible mountains. Emma watched them both, feeling something dangerous growing in her chest, something that felt like hope mixed with longing and fear. "Supper's ready," she announced, breaking the spell of the moment. "Chicken and dumplings." Joshua scooped up Thunder and raced toward the house, calling over his shoulder, "Come on, Benjamin. Thunder wants to hear more stories." Benjamin banked the forge fire and gathered his tools. As he worked, Emma noticed how naturally he moved through these end-of-day routines, how completely he seemed to have accepted their presence in his carefully ordered world. "Benjamin," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" He looked up from organizing his hammers by size. "Of course." "Why are you doing this? Really? Taking in strangers, fixing broken toys, sharing your home with people you barely know?" She gestured toward the house where Joshua's laughter drifted through the open windows. "Most men would have sent us away by now." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on his work. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 years' worth of grief and loneliness. "After Martha and the baby died, I thought I was done. Done with caring about anyone, done with hoping for anything beyond just getting through each day." He looked at her with eyes that held no pretense, no hidden agenda. "But then you knocked on my door, and Joshua asked me to fix his horse. And suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be needed for something good instead of just surviving." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. "What if we disappoint you? What if the baby comes and everything gets too hard and complicated?" "What if it doesn't?" Benjamin countered gently. "What if we figure it out together? What if 3 broken people really can help each other heal, like Reverend Morrison said?" From the house came the sound of Joshua setting the table, carefully placing Thunder beside his plate so the horse could join them for supper. The domestic normalcy of it, the simple act of a child preparing for a family meal, made Emma's heart ache with how much she wanted this to work. "I'm scared," she admitted. Benjamin nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "So am I. Scared of hoping too much. Scared of not hoping enough. Scared of failing you both the way I failed Martha and our daughter." "How did you fail them?" "You couldn't stop a fever. I couldn't save them. I couldn't protect them. I couldn't be strong enough when they needed me most." Benjamin's voice cracked slightly. "What if history repeats itself? What if I let you down when you need me most?" Emma stepped closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his words. "What if you don't? What if you're exactly the man we need you to be?" They stood in the growing darkness of the workshop, surrounded by the tools of Benjamin's trade, while the warm light from the house beckoned them towards supper and stories and the fragile possibility of something that might, with time and care and courage, become a real family. But even as hope loomed between them, neither could shake the feeling that their tentative happiness was too good to last. Change had come to Millfield in the form of a desperate woman and her son. But change, as Benjamin knew all too well, could be a fickle and dangerous thing. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but ended with Emma's world tilting sideways and threatening to spill everything she dared to hope for onto the dusty Kansas ground. Benjamin was in the workshop, teaching Joshua how to pump the bellows that kept the forge fire burning hot and steady. The boy's small hands gripped the wooden handle with determined concentration, his face serious as he learned the rhythm. Pump, pause, pump, pause, that would feed air to the hungry flames. "That's it, son," Benjamin encouraged, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "Steady as a heartbeat. The fire needs to breathe, just like we do." Emma stood in the kitchen kneading bread dough, listening to their voices drift through the open windows. 2 weeks had passed since their arrival, and she was still amazed by how naturally Joshua had taken to life at the forge. Her son, who had been quiet and withdrawn since his father's death, now chattered constantly about metal and heat and the 100 different ways you could shape iron into something useful. She pressed her knuckles into the soft dough, working it until it became smooth and elastic under her hands. The simple domestic task felt like a luxury after months of uncertainty and fear. Here, in Benjamin's kitchen, surrounded by the scents of yeast and flour and the coffee that always seemed to be brewing, she could almost pretend they were a real family, instead of 3 strangers learning to trust each other. The baby inside her kicked, a strong flutter against her ribs that made her pause in her kneading. 4 months along now, with winter still ahead and so many questions left unanswered. Would Benjamin still want them when the sleepless nights began, when doctor bills piled up, and her body grew too heavy for housework? When the reality of raising another man's child settled in like Kansas snow, beautiful at first, but cold and demanding and impossible to ignore? That's when she heard the horse approaching at a gallop, its hooves drumming against the hard-packed earth like thunder, rolling across the prairie. Emma wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and moved to the window, her heart already beginning to race with the instinct that told her trouble was riding toward their fragile peace. The horse and rider pulled up in a cloud of dust, and Emma's breath caught in her throat when she recognized the bay mare and the man in the dark suit. Tom Bradley, the postal clerk from Independence, only made special deliveries when news couldn't wait for the regular mail route. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Tom called out, swinging down from his saddle with the urgency of a man who'd ridden hard and fast. "Got a letter here marked urgent. Came on yesterday's train from Deadwood." Emma's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. The return address was written in handwriting she didn't recognize, but the name in the corner made her stomach drop like a stone thrown down a well. Marcus Hartwell, William's older brother. "Thank you, Tom," she managed, her voice sounding strange and far away to her own ears. Tom tipped his hat and remounted, already eager to get back to town and the cool shade of the post office. Emma stood in the doorway long after the dust from his horse had settled, staring at the letter that felt heavy as an anvil in her hands. From the workshop came the sound of Joshua's delighted laughter as Benjamin showed him how to hold the tongs properly. The boy was safe and happy, learning skills that might serve him well in life. For 2 weeks, Emma had allowed herself to believe they might actually have a future here. Now, holding Marcus's letter, she felt that hope crumbling like poorly mixed mortar. She knew what the letter would say before she opened it. William's family had found them. Her fingers shook as she broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. Marcus's handwriting was bold and aggressive, the words marching across the page like soldiers in formation. "Emma, word has reached us that you are living in Kansas with some blacksmith, unmarried, and carrying William's child. This arrangement is unacceptable and brings shame upon the Hartwell family name. The boy Joshua is William's heir and belongs with his father's people, where he can receive proper education and upbringing befitting his station. I will arrive in Millfield within the fortnight, with documentation proving Joshua's inheritance rights to William's mining claims. The child will return with me to Deadwood, where he belongs. As for the baby you carry, if it proves to be a son, he too has claim to Hartwell property and must be raised accordingly. Do not make this more difficult than necessary. The boy's future depends on family connections and financial security that no common laborer can provide. End this foolish arrangement and return to civilization, where you can be cared for properly during your confinement. Your brother-in-law, Marcus Hartwell." Emma read the letter twice, then a third time, each word hitting her like a physical blow. Marcus was coming. He wanted Joshua. He was prepared to use lawyers and inheritance laws and family rights to tear apart the fragile peace she'd found in this dusty prairie town. "Ma?" Joshua's voice cut through her panic. Is everything okay? Emma looked up to find her son standing in the kitchen doorway, his face smudged with soot but his eyes bright with the confidence that had grown during their time with Benjamin. Behind him, the blacksmith's tall frame filled the entrance, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he took in Emma's pale face and shaking hands. "What is it?" Benjamin asked, stepping forward. "Bad news?" Emma folded the letter quickly, stuffing it into her apron pocket before Joshua could see the writing that threatened to destroy his newfound happiness. "Just business. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart." But Joshua was 7 years old, not 7 months old. He'd learned to read faces long before he'd learned to read words, and his mother's face was telling a story that made his stomach twist with familiar fear. "Is someone trying to take us away?" he asked in a small voice. "Like when Mrs. Crawford said we couldn't stay at the boarding house anymore?" Emma knelt down and pulled her son into her arms, breathing in the scent of his hair and the lingering smell of forge smoke that clung to his clothes. "No one's taking you anywhere, Joshua. I promise." But even as she spoke the words, Emma knew she might not be able to keep that promise. Marcus had money and lawyers and the law on his side. He had William's name and family connections and the kind of respectability that carried weight in courtrooms and legal documents. What did she have? A dead husband's debts, a job she'd lost, and a temporary arrangement with a kind man who might change his mind when trouble came calling. Benjamin moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring in the chaos of Emma's spinning thoughts. "Emma," he said quietly, "whatever's in that letter, we can handle it together." She looked up at him, this man who'd opened his home and heart to strangers, who'd spent hours crafting a tiny horseshoe for a broken toy simply because it mattered to a lonely little boy. Benjamin had already given them more than she'd had any right to expect. She couldn't ask him to fight her battles too. "It's complicated," she said, releasing Joshua and standing up. "Family business from back east. Nothing that should concern you." Benjamin's eyes searched her face, reading the fear and determination warring there. "Does this family business involve Joshua?" Before Emma could answer, her son spoke up with the directness that children possessed before the world taught them to lie politely. "My pa's brother never wanted us around when pa was alive. Ma says he only cares about the mine now that pa's gone and can't work it himself." Emma's face burned with embarrassment that her 7-year-old had revealed so much with such simple honesty. Benjamin's expression grew thoughtful as pieces of a puzzle began fitting together in his mind. "This brother," Benjamin said carefully, "he's coming here?" Emma's silence was answer enough. Joshua looked between his mother and the man who'd become the closest thing to a father he'd known since William's death. "Benjamin won't let him take us away, will you? You'll make him leave us alone?" The faith in the boy's voice was like a knife twisting in Emma's chest. Joshua trusted Benjamin completely, believed with a child's absolute certainty that the blacksmith could solve any problem with the same skill he used to shape stubborn metal into useful tools. But some problems couldn't be fixed with hammer and anvil. Some battles couldn't be won with strong hands and good intentions. Benjamin knelt down to Joshua's level, his voice gentle but honest. "I'll do everything I can to keep you and your ma safe, son. That's a promise." Emma watched this exchange with growing despair. She'd brought trouble to Benjamin's doorstep, and now he was making promises he might not be able to keep. Marcus would arrive with legal papers and family rights and the kind of authority that could destroy everything they'd built in these precious few weeks. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening against the pale Kansas sky. Emma pressed her hand to her growing belly and felt the baby's responding kick, a life that would soon complicate everything even further. Change was coming to Millfield, Kansas, riding hard from Deadwood, with the power to tear apart the fragile family that 3 lost souls had dared to create together. And Emma wasn't sure that love and hope and Benjamin's steady strength would be enough to stand against the storm that was heading their way. 6 riders thundered into Millfield like a storm front sweeping across the prairie, their horses' hooves pounding out a rhythm that spoke of money, power, and absolute certainty that they would get what they came for. Benjamin stood at his forge, hammer frozen halfway to the anvil, as dust clouds rose behind the approaching men. He'd been expecting this moment for 3 days, ever since Emma had received that letter, and her face had gone white as winter snow. Now, trouble had arrived with the force of a Kansas tornado, and there was nowhere left to run. The lead writer sat tall in his saddle, wearing a black suit that cost more than most folks in Millfield made in a year. Everything about Marcus Hartwell screamed wealth and authority, from his polished boots to the gold watch chain glinting across his vest. His horse was a magnificent chestnut stallion, the kind of animal that spoke of breeding and careful attention, not the sturdy workhorses that pulled plows and wagons through the dusty streets of town. Behind Marcus rode 5 other men, all cut from the same cloth of prosperity and purpose. 2 wore suits nearly as fine as their leaders. The others dressed like hired hands, but their clothes were clean and their horses well fed. These weren't drifters or common cowboys. These were men with steady employment and clear instructions about what they'd come to accomplish. Emma emerged from the house, with Joshua close beside her, the boy's small hand gripping his wooden horse so tightly, his knuckles showed white through his sun-browned skin. She wore her best dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that she'd been saving for special occasions, but even dressed for company, she looked small and fragile against the backdrop of Benjamin's workshop. "Emma," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. "You look well. Motherhood agrees with you, even under these unusual circumstances." Benjamin moved to stand beside Emma and Joshua, his presence solid and reassuring despite the thundering of his own heart. He'd faced Confederate cavalry charges during the war, had stared down drunk cowboys looking for trouble on Saturday nights, but something about Marcus Hartwell's cold confidence made his skin crawl with warning. "Mr. Hartwell," Emma replied, her voice steady, though Benjamin could see the slight tremor in her hands. "I received your letter. I thought I made my position clear in my response." Marcus dismounted with practiced grace, handing his reins to one of his men without looking back. "Your response was disappointing. But I understand that grief and desperation can cloud a person's judgment. That's why I've come personally, to help you see reason." Joshua pressed closer to his mother's skirts, and Benjamin noticed how the boy's eyes darted between the strange men and their horses, reading danger in their rigid postures and unsmiling faces. 7 years old, and already learning that some visitors brought trouble instead of welcome. "There's nothing to discuss," Emma said, lifting her chin with the pride Benjamin had come to admire. "Joshua is my son, and I'll raise him where I see fit." "Joshua is William's son," Marcus corrected smoothly, "which makes him a Hartwell, with all the rights and responsibilities that name carries, including the right to inherit his father's mining claims and take his proper place in society." One of the suited men stepped forward, carrying a leather satchel that probably held enough legal documents to bury a small town in paperwork. "We have documentation proving the boy's parentage and inheritance rights. The territorial courts in Deadwood have already recognized the claim." Benjamin felt his jaw tighten as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about family obligation or concern for Joshua's welfare. This was about money, specifically about controlling the mining claims that William had died working. "The boy needs proper education," Marcus continued, his tone reasonable and persuasive. "Private tutors, connections with the right families, preparation for managing significant business interests. What can he learn here? How to swing a hammer. How to shoe horses for farmers who can barely afford to pay for the service." The words were designed to wound, and Benjamin felt them hit their mark. He was just a blacksmith, after all. He had strong hands and honest skills, but no money, no connections, no way to give Joshua the kind of advantages that Marcus was describing. But then Joshua surprised them all by stepping forward, still clutching his wooden horse but standing straighter than Benjamin had ever seen him. "I'm learning plenty," the boy said, his young voice clear and defiant. "Benjamin teaches me about fire and metal and making things that last. He tells me stories about brave horses and distant places. He fixed thunder when nobody else could." Joshua held up his toy horse with its tiny metal shoe. "And he never gets mad when I ask questions, even when I ask 100 of them." Marcus glanced at the wooden horse with barely concealed disdain. Child's toys and fairy tales won't prepare you for inheriting mining operations worth thousands of dollars, nephew." "I'm not your nephew," Joshua said with startling firmness. "My pa's dead, and you never cared about us when he was alive. Ma told me so." Emma's face flushed with embarrassment that her son had spoken so boldly, but Benjamin felt a surge of pride at the boy's courage. Joshua might be small, but he had the heart of a fighter. Marcus's patient smile faltered slightly. "The boy has spirit. I'll give him that. But spirit without proper guidance leads to wasted potential. Emma, be reasonable. You're expecting another child, living unmarried with a stranger, dependent on his charity for basic survival. Is this really the life you want for William's sons?" "How do you know the baby's a boy?" Emma asked sharply. "I don't. But if it is, he'll also have claim to Hartwell property. 2 heirs are better than 1 when it comes to securing mining rights against territorial challenges." Benjamin's hands clenched into fists as the full scope of Marcus's plan became clear. He didn't care about Joshua or the unborn baby as children who needed love and protection. He saw them as legal tools, ways to maintain control over valuable property. "And if the baby's a girl?" Benjamin asked, his voice deadly quiet. Marcus shrugged. "Then she's of no particular concern to the Hartwell family interests." Emma stepped forward, her eyes blazing with maternal fury. "Get off this property. Now, before I ask Benjamin to make you leave." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Marcus said, his reasonable tone never wavering. "I have legal guardianship papers for Joshua, signed by a territorial judge in Deadwood. The boy is coming with us whether you cooperate or not." He nodded to one of his men, who reached into his saddlebag and produced a folded document, sealed with official-looking ribbons and stamps. Benjamin didn't need to read it to understand what it represented: the power of law and money and family connections, all arrayed against their fragile happiness. "You can't just take him," Emma said, but her voice carried less certainty now. "Actually, I can. The law is quite clear about a father's family having rights to orphaned children, especially when the mother is living in questionable circumstances." Marcus's eyes swept meaningfully over Benjamin, Emma, and the modest homestead around them. "Of course, if you were properly married to this blacksmith, that might complicate things. But as it stands—" "We are married," Emma said suddenly, desperation making her voice ring too loud in the afternoon air. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? Then you won't mind showing us the certificate." Silence stretched between them, like a rope pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. Benjamin felt Emma's panic radiating beside him, saw Joshua's confusion as he looked between the adults whose words were reshaping his world with every exchange. "The certificate is being prepared by Reverend Morrison," Emma said weakly. "How convenient. And when did this marriage take place?" Emma's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out to support her desperate lie. Benjamin watched her struggle, knowing that Marcus had trapped them both in a corner with no clean way out. "Last Sunday," Benjamin said suddenly, stepping forward to stand beside Emma, "Reverend Morrison performed a simple ceremony. We're waiting for the official paperwork to be completed." Marcus studied Benjamin's face with the calculating look of a man who made his living reading other people's weaknesses. How romantic. A whirlwind courtship and hasty marriage. "I'm sure the good Reverend will be happy to confirm the details when we speak with him." Benjamin felt sweat break out across his forehead despite the cooling afternoon air. Reverend Morrison was an honest man who wouldn't lie to support their deception, even if he wanted to help. And Marcus clearly intended to verify every word of their story. "In the meantime," Marcus continued smoothly, "I'm sure you won't mind if we wait in town for a few days while the legal details are sorted out. Just to ensure that all proper procedures are followed, you understand." It wasn't a request. It was a threat wrapped in polite language, a warning that Marcus had the time and resources to investigate every aspect of their lives until he found the ammunition he needed to take Joshua away. Benjamin looked at Emma, saw the fear and desperation warring in her green eyes, and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "Actually," he said, his voice steady despite the wild beating of his heart, "we'd be honored if you'd join us for supper tonight. Give us a chance to discuss Joshua's future like civilized people." Marcus's smile was sharp as a knife blade. How generous. We accept. The dining room had never felt smaller or more suffocating than it did that evening, with Marcus Hartwell holding court at the head of Benjamin's own table, like a conquering general surveying captured territory. Emma served beef stew and fresh bread with hands that only trembled slightly, though Benjamin could see the effort it cost her to maintain composure, while Marcus's cold eyes followed her every movement. The man had a way of making ordinary actions feel like evidence in some invisible trial, as if Emma's choice of serving dishes or the way she ladled soup somehow proved her unfitness as a mother. Joshua sat pressed against Benjamin's side, picking at his food with the mechanical motions of a child whose appetite had been killed by adult tensions he couldn't fully understand. His wooden horse, Thunder, sat beside his plate, the tiny metal shoe catching lamplight like a small beacon of better times. "Excellent stew," Marcus commented, dabbing his mouth with Emma's second-best napkin. "You've certainly learned to keep house properly. Though I imagine it's easier when you only have one child to manage. Babies can be so demanding." Benjamin watched Emma's jaw tighten at the veiled threat. Marcus had spent the entire meal dropping hints about the challenges of raising multiple children, the expenses involved, the way crying infants could strain even the strongest relationships. "Emma manages beautifully," Benjamin said firmly. "She's going to be a wonderful mother to this baby, just like she is to Joshua." "Oh, I don't doubt her maternal instincts," Marcus replied smoothly. "It's the practical matters that concern me. Medical care, proper nutrition, education, all things that require substantial financial resources that a small-town blacksmith might struggle to provide." One of Marcus's men, the one who'd carried the legal documents, leaned forward with predatory interest. "Mr. Cray, if you don't mind my asking, what would you estimate your annual earnings to be? Just so we can assess Joshua's future security, you understand." Benjamin felt heat rise in his cheeks at the insulting directness of the question. These men were treating him like a servant being evaluated for employment, not the man who'd opened his home to Emma and Joshua when no one else would. "I earn enough," he said quietly. "Enough for what?" Marcus pressed. "Enough to send Joshua to university? Enough to provide for medical emergencies? Enough to give him the social connections he'll need to manage inherited property worth more than this entire town?" Joshua looked up from his barely touched stew, his gray eyes moving between Marcus and Benjamin like a spectator at some gladiatorial contest where he was both prize and victim. "I don't want to manage property," the boy said in a voice smaller than usual. "I want to learn about horses and making things, and children often want things that aren't in their best interests," Marcus interrupted gently. "That's why adults must make difficult decisions for them." "Benjamin isn't making decisions for me," Joshua said, showing a flash of the spirit that had impressed Benjamin so many times. "He asks me what I think about things. He listens when I talk." "How progressive," Marcus said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But listening to a 7-year-old's opinions about his future is rather like asking a horse to choose its own destination. Charming, but ultimately impractical." Benjamin's knuckles went white as he gripped his fork, imagining how satisfying it would be to plant his fist in Marcus Hartwell's smug face. But violence wouldn't solve this problem. If anything, it would give Marcus exactly the excuse he needed to paint Benjamin as unfit company for children. Emma set down her spoon with careful precision, her voice steady when she spoke. "Mr. Hartwell, you've made your position clear, but Joshua is my son, and I'll raise him as I see fit. If you want to challenge that legally, then we'll meet you in court." "Will we?" Marcus's eyebrows rose in polite surprise. "And who will represent you?" "The territorial courts favor established families with proven resources. Single mothers living in questionable arrangements. Well, let's just say the legal system tends to prioritize children's welfare over parents' wishes." "She's not single," Benjamin said firmly. "We told you, we're married." Marcus's smile grew wider, and Benjamin realized with growing dread that he'd been maneuvered into exactly the position his opponent wanted. "Yes, about that marriage. I took the liberty of speaking with Reverend Morrison this afternoon. Fascinating conversation." Marcus paused, clearly savoring the moment. "It seems the good Reverend has no record of performing any wedding ceremony for you and Mrs. Hartwell. In fact, he seemed quite surprised to hear that such a ceremony had supposedly taken place." Emma's face went pale as prairie grass in winter. Joshua looked between the adults with growing confusion, sensing that something important was crumbling around him, but not understanding what. "Perhaps you misunderstood," Benjamin began. "Oh, I understood perfectly," Marcus interrupted. "Just as I understand that you're living in sin with a pregnant woman and her child, providing them shelter in exchange for. Well, we needn't discuss the details in front of the boy." "How dare you?" Emma started to rise from her chair, but Marcus held up a hand. "Please, let's keep this civilized. I'm not here to judge anyone's personal choices. I'm simply concerned about Joshua's welfare and future prospects." He turned his attention to the boy, who was clutching his wooden horse so tightly that Benjamin worried it might crack. "Joshua, how would you like to see where your father grew up? The house where he lived as a boy? The mines he worked before he died?" Joshua's eyes darted to his mother, confusion written clearly across his young features. I don't know. There are other boys your age in Deadwood, boys from good families who could be your friends. And there's a proper school, with real teachers and books about history and mathematics and geography. Marcus's voice took on a warm, persuasive tone. "You could learn about the world beyond this little town. Wouldn't that be exciting?" "But what about Benjamin?" Joshua asked in a small voice. "What about Thunder's adventures?" "Toys and stories are fine for small children," Marcus said gently. "But you're growing up now. It's time to put childish things aside and prepare for your real responsibilities." Benjamin watched the conversation with growing despair, seeing how skillfully Marcus was working to isolate Joshua from everything that had brought joy back into the boy's life. The man was a master manipulator, using reasonable words and caring tones to mask his true intentions. "The choice is yours, Emma," Marcus said, turning back to her with satisfaction. "You can fight this in territorial court, where you'll lose expensively and publicly. Or you can do what's best for Joshua and allow him to return with me to Deadwood, where he belongs." "And the baby?" Emma asked, her hand moving protectively to her rounded belly. "If it's a boy, he'll be welcome in the Hartwell family once he's old enough. If not," Marcus shrugged eloquently. "Well, daughters don't inherit mining claims." The casual cruelty of the statement hit Benjamin like a physical blow. This man saw children as property, to be collected or discarded based on their usefulness to his business interests. "You have until morning to decide," Marcus continued, rising from the table with the satisfied air of a man who'd accomplished his goals. "My associates and I will be staying at the hotel in town. We'll return at dawn for your answer." Joshua jumped up from his chair, still clutching Thunder, his young face etched with panic. "Ma, you're not going to let him take me away, are you?" Emma knelt down and pulled her son into her arms, holding him tight while tears she'd been fighting all evening finally spilled down her cheeks. "I won't let anyone hurt you, sweetheart. I promise." But even as she spoke the words, Benjamin could hear the desperation beneath them. Marcus held all the cards: money, legal authority, family connections, and the ruthless determination to use whatever weapons necessary to get what he wanted. As the Hartwell party mounted their horses and rode toward town, leaving behind only dust and the lingering scent of expensive cologne, Benjamin felt the weight of tomorrow pressing down on them like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Three people who dared to hope for happiness together now faced the very real possibility of being torn apart by forces beyond their control. And Benjamin wasn't sure that love and determination would be enough to stand against the storm that was about to break over their heads. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall like tears from a sky that understood their sorrow. Thunder crashed overhead like the sound of heaven splitting apart, and in that moment of brilliant white lightning, Benjamin Cray made a decision that would either save his family or destroy them all. "Wake up!" He shook Emma gently, his voice urgent in the pre-dawn darkness. "We need to leave. Now." Emma sat up in bed, instantly alert with the mother's instinct that never truly sleeps. Through her bedroom window, She could see the first gray hints of sunrise creeping across the Kansas horizon, and somewhere in town, Marcus Hartwell would soon be mounting his horse to come collect what he believed was rightfully his. "Benjamin, what's happening?" "Get Joshua. Pack only what you can carry in saddlebags. We're riding out before Marcus gets here." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she struggled to understand. "Riding out where? We can't just run away. He'll follow us. He has the law on his side." Benjamin moved to the window, peering through the curtains toward the road that led to town. No dust clouds yet, but that would change soon enough. Not if we get to the territorial capital first. File our own legal papers. Get married by a proper judge. Establish our rights before Marcus can stop us. That's 3 days hard riding to Topeka. Maybe 4 with Joshua and... Emma gestured to her rounded belly, heavy with 6 months of pregnancy. "Then we'd better get started." The urgency in Benjamin's voice cut through Emma's sleepy confusion like a knife. She could hear him moving around the house, gathering supplies, preparing for the kind of desperate journey that people only undertook when staying meant losing everything that mattered. Joshua appeared in her doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes and clutching thunder against his chest. "Ma, why is everyone awake? Is it morning already?" Emma pulled her son close, breathing in the warm scent of his hair while her mind raced through possibilities and problems. Running away felt like admitting defeat, like proving Marcus right about their unsuitability as parents. But staying meant watching Joshua disappear into a world of cold calculation and inherited obligations that would crush his gentle spirit. "We're going on an adventure, sweetheart," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Remember those stories Benjamin tells about thunder galloping across distant territories? Well, we're going to see some of those places ourselves." Joshua's eyes widened with excitement that quickly gave way to worry. "What about the mean man who wants to take me away?" "He can't take you anywhere if he can't find you," Benjamin said from the doorway, his arms full of supplies. "But we need to move fast and quiet, like Indians tracking buffalo across the plains." The comparison sparked Joshua's imagination in exactly the way Benjamin had hoped. The boy straightened his shoulders and nodded with the seriousness of a 7-year-old accepting an important mission. "I'll pack Thunder's things," Joshua whispered, as if Marcus might be listening from miles away. As her son crept back to his room, Emma caught Benjamin's arm. "This is crazy. We'll be fugitives, running across Kansas with a pregnant woman and a child. What if something goes wrong? What if the baby comes early? What if we stay and lose everything?" Benjamin countered. "What if Joshua grows up believing his only value is in the mining claims he inherits? What if our baby learns that love doesn't matter as much as money and family connections?" Emma stared into his eyes, seeing determination mixed with fear and something else, something that looked like the fierce protectiveness of a father defending his cubs. In 3 weeks, Benjamin had claimed Joshua as completely as if the boy had been born to him, and the child she carried. Benjamin spoke of it as "our baby," with such natural conviction that Emma sometimes forgot William had ever existed. "The horses won't make it," she said, grasping for practical objections to a plan that felt both insane and like their only hope. "Not carrying 3 people plus supplies for 4 days. I've got that figured out." Benjamin moved to the kitchen, stuffing jerky and hardtack into canvas bags. "We'll take Samson and Belle. They're strong enough for double riding. Plus, we'll pick up fresh mounts in Lawrence and again in Carbondale. I've got friends from the war scattered across Kansas. Men who'll help without asking too many questions." Emma felt a flutter of hope amid her panic. Benjamin had fought in the Kansas Volunteer Cavalry during the war. He'd mentioned it only once, reluctantly, when Joshua had asked about a faded scar on his forearm. If he had connections, men who owed him favors or simply respected what he'd sacrificed for the Union cause, then maybe this desperate plan had a chance. Thunder rumbled again outside, and the first fat raindrops began spattering against the windows. The storm that had been building all week was finally breaking, which meant muddy roads and difficult travel. But it also meant that Marcus and his men might be delayed, giving them precious extra time to put distance between themselves and Millfield. "Ma, Joshua reappeared with his small canvas bag, thunder sticking out of the top along with a spare shirt and the wooden whistle Benjamin had carved for him. Are we really going to outrun the bad men like outlaws in the stories? We're not outlaws, sweetheart. We're a family protecting itself. Emma knelt down to Joshua's level, helping him adjust his bag so it would ride more comfortably. But yes, we need to be very clever and very brave. Can you do that? Joshua nodded solemnly. Thunder says he's ready for the biggest adventure ever. Benjamin appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hat already on and his face grim with purpose. Horses are saddled. Emma, can you ride in your condition? I rode everywhere when I was carrying Joshua. Pregnancy doesn't make women helpless, just more careful. Emma stood up, smoothing down her traveling dress, the sturdy brown one that wouldn't show road dust. But Benjamin, what about your forge? Your business? Everything you've built here? For a moment, Benjamin's resolve wavered. She could see him thinking about the workshop where he'd spent the last 3 years rebuilding his life one horseshoe at a time. The tools he'd inherited from his father, the reputation he'd earned through honest work, the small but steady income that had given him purpose after Martha's death. I can build another forge, he said finally. I can't build another chance at happiness. The simple statement hit Emma like a physical blow. Here was a man willing to give up everything he'd worked for, everything familiar and secure in his life, just to keep her and Joshua safe. The magnitude of his sacrifice made her throat close with emotion. What if we can't get married in Topeka? What if the judge won't help us? Then we keep going. Colorado territory, maybe. Or Oregon. Somewhere far enough away that Marcus Hartwell's money and connections don't matter. Benjamin picked up the heaviest supply bag, settling its weight across his shoulder. Emma, I know this isn't the life you planned. Running across the country, always looking over our shoulders, never knowing if we'll be safe. If you want to stay and fight this legally. No. Emma's voice was fierce with sudden certainty. Joshua is my son. This baby is my child. I won't let anyone take them away just because they have more money or better lawyers or family names that mean something in territorial courts. She grabbed her own bag and moved toward the door, then paused to look back at the kitchen where she'd learned to be happy again. The bread dough she'd been preparing for breakfast still sat rising on the counter, covered with a damp cloth. By evening, it would be overproofed and useless, a small symbol of the normal life they were abandoning. Ma? Joshua tugged on her skirt. What if Thunder gets scared during the storm? Emma looked down at her son's worried face, then at Benjamin, waiting by the door with patient understanding. Outside, the storm was growing stronger, rain drumming against the roof with increasing intensity. In a few hours, Marcus would arrive to find an empty house and the cold ashes of a forge that would never again ring with the sound of Benjamin's hammer. Thunder won't get scared, she said, taking Joshua's hand in hers. He's got you to take care of him, and Benjamin to guide the way, and me to make sure we all stay together. That's what families do. They protect each other, no matter how far they have to travel or how hard the journey gets. Benjamin opened the door, letting in a gust of wind and rain that made the lamp flames flicker. Beyond the threshold lay uncertainty, danger, and the kind of desperate gamble that people only took when staying meant losing their souls. But also beyond that threshold lay freedom, the chance to build a life based on love instead of obligation, choice instead of inheritance, hope instead of the bitter mathematics of profit and loss. Ready? Benjamin asked. Emma squeezed Joshua's hand, felt her unborn baby kick against her ribs, as if eager to join the adventure, and stepped out into the storm with the two people who mattered more than safety, more than security, more than anything else in the wide, dangerous, beautiful world. Behind them, the house stood empty and waiting, while ahead lay 300 miles of muddy roads, uncertain weather, and the slim chance that love might prove stronger than law, that family bonds freely chosen might triumph over those imposed by blood and money and the cold calculations of men who saw children as property to be claimed or discarded at will. The race was on, and everything Benjamin, Emma, and Joshua had built together hung in the balance. The sun broke through storm clouds like a golden promise 3 days later casting long shadows across the courtyard of the Shawnee County Courthouse in Topeka, as Emma Hartwell, soon to be Emma Cray, smoothed her best dress and tried to calm the butterflies dancing in her stomach. "Judge Patterson will see you now," the clerk announced, his voice echoing in the marble-floored hallway where Benjamin, Emma, and Joshua waited like defendants about to hear their sentence. Joshua pressed closer to his mother's side, still clutching thunder despite Benjamin's gentle suggestion that wooden horses might not be appropriate courtroom companions. The boy had been unusually quiet since their arrival in Topeka that morning, overwhelmed by the imposing government buildings and the serious-faced people hurrying through corridors that smelled of law books and important decisions. "Remember," Benjamin whispered as they stood to enter the judge's chambers, "we're just 3 people who want to be a family. Nothing more complicated than that." But Emma knew it was far more complicated. They were fugitives from Marcus Hartwell's legal claims, refugees from a system that valued property rights over children's happiness, gamblers betting everything on the slim chance that one territorial judge might listen to their hearts instead of their bank accounts. Judge Patterson was younger than Emma had expected, maybe 40 years old, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and calloused hands that suggested he understood working people's struggles. His chambers were lined with law books, but also decorated with photographs of children, his own, Emma hoped, which might make him sympathetic to their situation. "Please, sit down," the judge said, gesturing to the wooden chairs arranged before his desk. "I understand you're seeking an emergency marriage license and ceremony. Clerk Adams mentioned some urgency in your request." Benjamin cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what hung on this conversation. "Your Honor, we're asking for your help in protecting this family from being torn apart by people who see children as property instead of human beings with their own rights to happiness." Emma watched the judge's face carefully as Benjamin explained their situation, leaving out the part about running away in the middle of the night, but being honest about Marcus Hartwell's intentions and the legal papers he'd brought from Deadwood. "So this man claims guardianship rights over the boy based on family connections?" Judge Patterson asked, making notes on a piece of official paper. "He claims Joshua should inherit mining properties," Emma said, finding her voice. "But what he really wants is control over those claims. Joshua is just a means to an end." Joshua spoke up suddenly, his young voice clear in the quiet chamber. "Your Honor, may I say something?" The judge's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he nodded. "Of course, son. This concerns you most of all." Joshua stood up, still holding thunder but with his shoulders back, and his chin raised in a way that reminded Emma powerfully of her late husband's stubborn dignity. "My pa died in the mines, and I don't want to die there too. I want to stay with Ma and Benjamin and learn about making things instead of just digging them up." "And you want Benjamin to be your father?" Joshua considered this with the seriousness of someone much older than 7. "He already is my father, in all the ways that matter. He teaches me things and listens when I'm scared and fixes my toys when they break. He doesn't care about money or mines or being important. He just cares about us." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes as her son's simple honesty filled the chamber with truth that no legal document could contradict. Judge Patterson was quiet for a long moment, studying Joshua's earnest face. "Mrs. Hartwell," the judge said finally, "territorial law does generally favor blood relatives in custody matters, especially when significant property interests are involved." Emma's heart sank, but Judge Patterson held up a hand. "However," he continued, "the law also recognizes that children's welfare must be the primary consideration in any custody decision. And from what I can see here, this boy is clearly happy, healthy, and loved by the people he considers his family." The judge stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the busy street where ordinary people went about their daily business, working, shopping, caring for their families, without lawyers and legal papers, and territorial courts complicating their simple human desires. "The marriage license is no problem," he said finally. "I can perform the ceremony right here, right now, if you're both certain this is what you want." Benjamin reached for Emma's hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers in a grip that felt like a promise carved from solid iron. More certain than I've been about anything since my first wife died. Emma looked at this man who'd given up everything familiar in his life to protect her and Joshua, who'd ridden 3 hard days through storm and mud without a single complaint, who spoke of her unborn child as if it already belonged to him completely. "I'm certain too," she said. The ceremony was simple and beautiful in its plainness. No flowers or music or fancy clothes, just 2 people promising to love and protect each other, while a 7-year-old boy and his wooden horse served as witnesses to the miracle of new beginnings. "By the authority vested in me by Kansas Territory," Judge Patterson said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Benjamin kissed Emma gently, tasting salt from happy tears on her lips, while Joshua cheered and thunder galloped across an imaginary landscape of endless possibilities. But their celebration was interrupted by a commotion in the courthouse hallway, raised voices, the sound of boots against marble floors, the unmistakable authority of men accustomed to getting their way. "Judge Patterson!" Marcus Hartwell's voice rang through the building like a shot fired in church. "I demand you stop this illegal proceeding immediately." Emma's blood turned to ice water in her veins as Marcus burst through the chamber doors with 2 of his men flanking him like bodyguards. His expensive clothes were rumpled from hard travel, his face flushed with anger, and the kind of outrage that rich men felt when poor people dared to defy their will. "Mr. Hartwell, I presume?" Judge Patterson remained seated behind his desk, his voice calm and official. "You're too late. The marriage has been legally performed and properly documented." Marcus's eyes blazed as he took in the scene. Benjamin and Emma standing together with matching gold rings, borrowed from the judge's own wife. Joshua pressed against Benjamin's side, the marriage certificate already signed and sealed on the desk. "This is a mockery of justice," Marcus snarled. "These people are fugitives from legal process in Deadwood. The boy belongs to his father's family, not to some vagrant blacksmith and his pregnant paramour." "The boy," Judge Patterson said coolly, "belongs with the people who love him and can provide for his welfare. The marriage is legal and binding, which gives Mr. Cray full parental rights as Joshua's stepfather." "We'll see about that," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "I have resources, connections, legal representation that will bury these people in court proceedings until they beg for mercy." Benjamin stepped forward, placing himself between Marcus and his new family with the same calm courage he'd shown during cavalry charges in the war. "You're welcome to try. But you'll be fighting a legal marriage now, not just an unmarried woman with no resources. And I've got friends too, men who fought for this territory's freedom and don't take kindly to carpetbaggers from Deadwood trying to steal children for profit." For a moment, the 2 men faced each other across the chamber like gunfighters at dawn, each measuring the other's resolve and resources. Then Marcus's shoulders sagged slightly as he realized that his easy victory had slipped through his fingers like water through a broken dam. "This isn't over," he said finally. "That boy carries Hartwell blood, and no territorial marriage certificate will change that fact." "No," Emma said, stepping forward with her hand resting on her rounded belly. "But it changes everything else. Joshua is our son now, legally and completely. This baby will be born into a real family, with parents who chose each other freely. And if you try to hurt any of us, you'll discover that love makes people stronger than you imagine." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, reading something in her face that made his own expression shift from anger to grudging respect. Then he turned on his heel and stalked from the chamber, his men trailing behind like disappointed scavengers, leaving a kill they couldn't claim. As the sound of their boots faded down the marble hallway, Joshua looked up at Benjamin and Emma with eyes that shone like stars. "Are we really a family now? Forever? And always?" Benjamin knelt down and pulled the boy into a hug that smelled of forge, smoke, and honest sweat, and the particular joy of dreams that had somehow managed to come true against impossible odds. "Forever and always," he promised. "Through storm and sunshine, prosperity and hardship, all the adventures still waiting for us down the road." Emma rested her hand on Benjamin's shoulder, feeling their baby kick, as if eager to join this conversation about belonging and love and the beautiful uncertainty of tomorrow. Outside the courthouse windows, Kansas territory stretched endlessly toward horizons that promised both challenge and possibility to those brave enough to chase them. They were no longer running from Marcus Hartwell and his legal papers and his cold calculations about property rights and inheritance laws. Now they were running towards something infinitely more valuable, a future built on choice instead of obligation, on love freely given instead of duty grudgingly accepted, on the radical notion that families could be forged as surely as iron, shaped by patient hands into something stronger than blood, more lasting than law, more precious than all the mining claims in Deadwood. The weight of tomorrow no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled.